All right. I want to talk about selection. So when we were dealing with raster graphics, like either Adobe Photoshop or Adobe or Photopea, that we had a lot of tools to help us select pixels, right? And that's because, um, we had to select pixels in order to do anything. We had various tools like selection tools and lasso tools and all that good stuff, right? But at the end of the day, that's because when you deal with a raster graphic, like this JPEG here, every pixel is independent of each other, right? So if I select one pixel, I can take that one pixel and I can literally move it to anywhere else. Okay. So it makes selecting things a lot more difficult. In a vector type program like Adobe Illustrator or Figma, selection is actually pretty simple. To select a vector, use the selection tool and simply highlight it. By clicking on it, you can click it and move it. Click it and move it. It's pretty much that simple. To deselect, simply click off of the vector shape onto your canvas or your frame, and that's pretty much all you really need to do. Okay. When we're in Photoshop or Photopea, we would transform. So if I made a selection like this, I could take my selection and I could resize it by using free transform and resizing it or doing rotation to it. We could do the same thing in Figma. It's actually built into the program. This is typical of most vector programs. So I'm going to highlight this fleur here. And when I do so, you can see it automatically actually gives me little widgets here that allow me to scale. So if I click, you can see I can scale vertically, horizontally. If you hold down Shift, it'll maintain your aspect ratio. Note that when I blow this up, it does not distort because once again, vectors have infinite resolution. They don't distort when they're being enlarged. If you want to rotate, you can click here. And so when I put my cursor beyond the edges, you can see I'm getting that double-ended arrow. That double-ended arrow allows me to rotate as such. If I hold down Shift, it rotates in increments of about 45 degrees. I can also take something and flip it. So if I were to rotate this, the problem is I want to have the flag here on the other side. So what I'm trying to do is kind of flip it upside down. What I could do, there's a couple ways to do it. One, I could take the scale and do a reverse scale like that. Another way to do this would be going under Object, or it should be under Arrange, Flip Horizontal, and you can see when I do that, it flips it. There's also Flip Vertical. Okay, so either way of that would work. So you can rotate, or you can scale, you can rotate, and you can flip. Other ways of doing this is if you highlight, when I click on the layout, this case, when it talks about dimension, the dimensions are not the canvas or the frame, but actually this. So right now it's like this is 182 by 182. If I were to make this 250 by 250, you can see I'm scaling this. If I select this, um, and I want to rotate, there's actually a rotation option right here. And if I wanted to rotate it exactly 45 degrees, I could do something like that. If I wanted to flip it, there's actually a flipping options, flip horizontal or flip vertical option. All right, let's talk about creating vector shapes. So we've learned how to move them around, but how do we make a vector shape? Well, down here in our toolbar, we can make some very basic vector shapes. This includes a rectangle. I can do that by selecting rectangle or hitting the R key on the keyboard, click and drag. and it makes a rectangle. The next would be a line, like it sounds like. I can click and make a line. If I hold down Shift, it allows me to put it in rotation of 45 degrees. I can make an arrow. The difference between an arrow and a line is it should put little arrowhead on it. Eventually, if you want to change the way that that looks, that option would come into your properties under your stroke option, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but this allows you to do different types of arrows and things. I can make an ellipse or an oval. If you want it to be a perfect circle, hold down the Shift key to make a perfect circle. Now, normally when you make, by the way, I didn't mention this, but you can do it this way. You can make a perfect square with a similar situation where if I use the rectangle and hold down Shift, that would make a perfect square. Much like other graphic design programs or computers in general, it will always usually start from the upper left-hand corner. If you don't want to do that, for either one of these, if you hold down the Option or the Alt key, you will start from the center as opposed to the upper left-hand corner as such. Okay. I'm going to get rid of some of my, by the way, when I make these vector shapes, notice how they appear in my layers. So these are the various um, shapes that I've made. If you want to turn them on and off, kind of like layers in Photoshop or Photopea, you can turn those off. So this is the visibility toggle that we've talked about before. I can also lock these layers by clicking on the little lock icon. The lock icon would mean that I cannot select that particular shape and be able to move it or make any changes to it until I unlock it as such. Okay. I'm going to choose a polygon. A polygon allows me to make a multi-sided shape. I'm going to click and drag. And when I do that, this option, this little circle that's on the tip, this allows me to change the number of points. So, if I click on this and I drag it, see how I'm adding sides to my shape. It can go as low as a triangle or three sides, but then I can have four, five, six, so on and so on. Another way to do this is actually from the count option in your properties panel here. So if I were to type 8, that would change it to an octagon. This inner one, what this does is it allows you to round out the edges here. So if I click and drag, you can see I'm rounding out the edges of this triangle. Okay. I can also make a star. A star allows me to make a vector star shape here. If I want the star to have, perfect, not a perfect, but you know what I mean, like good aspect ratio, you can hold in the Shift key. If you want it to start from the center, hold down the Option or the Alt key as such. This is the number. Once again, if I click on this thing on the edge that says count, that means the number of points to my star. So I can add more or less points. This is the ratio, which is how pointy or bulbous your star shape is. And this is how rounded your tips are. These can all be affected from the properties panel. So if I wanted to have more sides of my star, or if I wanted to kind of make this more bulbous, I could give this a percentage amount. This is how rounded my corners are. So if I wanted to change that, I could do something like that. All right. This last one I'm not going to show you. And the reason why, you could. So if you wanted to import vectors into Figma, you could. You can also import raster images. Figma can work with standard vector formats. Standard vector formats that you could import would be what's called a EPS file or an encapsulated PostScript. You can also work with what's called an SVG file, which is a scalable vector graphic. A good place you could find some of these vectors that I'm talking about. There's a link to it in the modules. This place called the Noun Project. It's a website that's basically a directory of vector shapes that you can sort through and download. So my internet seems to be a bit slow. Okay. Am I still recording? Good. All right. This site is kind of a directory. So let's say I put in the word, I don't know, dinosaur. I'm going to type it and it's going to give me a logo or a graphic that I can probably download as a vector. So let's use the old, I like this one. So I'm gonna click on this one. You do have to have an account for this website, but like Figma, it is also free. You just have to, set one up because everything nowadays makes you sign up for it. What I'm going to do is now it seems like you have to pay for this. You don't. You just have to go to where it says attribution required, click icon, and then we're going to choose the SVG format because that's a vector format. Downloading it as a PNG would be a raster format. And so I'm going to go to Figma here, and I'm going to go to image video, and I'm going to click where it says SVG. You can see it loads it into my document here, and I'm going to click and drag, and there's the file. All right. And I could play around with the dimensions just like I played around with dimensions for my own custom shapes here. So this is how, I'm not expecting you guys to download stuff off the internet, but you could if you wanted to. But this is how you can make some very simple custom vector shapes in Figma and do some simple editing. Okay, why don't you guys try that out? That was 5, 6, and 7. In the next one, I'm going to talk about the concept of fill and stroke and how that relates to vector graphics. Okay?